To begin with, tell us how this came to you. Did you have a relationship with the director already?
I did. I scored a short film with him, I guess in like late 2012, called Sleepwalking in the Rift. Yeah, it was like it was actually a clothing commercial. It was supposed to be a minute and a half long, and then Cary ended up editing a 20-minute version of it. And yeah, I worked on that with him first, and then he called me to work on this film, and I loved working with him the first time, so I said, of course.
So it's interesting that your next big film assignment after Beasts of the Southern Wild is another film where a child is the focus and is once again in dire circumstances.
Yeah, that seems to be my vibe.
Well, talk about when Cary approached you, did he have specific ideas about the music, or was he open to what you thought the approach should be?
He was super open. It was the kind of thing where he was just like, I want to know what you think is cool. We talked about a couple like really basic ideas. We talked a lot about like droning and a lot about atonality as far as like glissandos go. And like I made this score without him hearing a note of it. I scored the entire film, and I sent it to him, and it was a lot of strings and a lot of horns and a lot of pianos. That's kind of like what we like planned on doing originally. And then we had a long talk about it, and we decided it would be cool to kind of go back and replace it with a lot of sample-based stuff, a lot of synthesis, to make it feel like it was more regionless.
Was that difficult? Because you had obviously, done the whole picture, and you must have had thought that you were on the right track, either emotionally or, in some direction.
Well, the original time frame for the score was that I had a month to do it. It was originally I had a couple of films I was finishing up for Sundance, so it was the kind of thing where he was like, okay, you can start January 15th, our deadline's February 15th, so like bang out this score, let's go. And so I just spent kind of like every waking hour on this score. And then as we got closer, he was like, I think we have a little more time, and I ended up working on the film till June 5th. Which was amazing. I mean, I went back home to, I'm from Brooklyn. I went back to New York and worked with him until, I think I went out there around March, and then stayed out there for quite a few months through the final mix. I just sat through all the mixing, and it just became such a passion project.
So if the first approach didn't work for you, how did you ultimately arrive at this sort of combination of ambient and sort of electronic textures, that kind of thing?
I mean, a lot of the chord progressions, a lot of the melodies stayed the same. It was just an issue of like what kind of sounds we really want making this stuff. The orchestral stuff, kind of. I mean, looking back at it, when I watched the old versions of it when I was working on stuff, sometimes I'd go back and kind of like when I was like trying to figure out what pieces should be, I'd look at every version that I'd made, and the orchestral versions felt. They felt wrong. They felt totally wrong ultimately, and I think that like the kind of like sample stuff and synth stuff with tons of distortion and reverb really felt like more the right thing.
And why is that, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the film takes place in, we don't know what country we don't know where the film takes place, and I think that putting traditional instruments that we can recognize instantly gives us some sort of regional idea, even though, I mean, that kind of gives us, as Cary says, the strings feel colonial. And he didn't want a colonial feel. He didn't want it to feel influenced by that. He wanted it to feel like it was of this region that we weren't sure what it was exactly.
So there was never any thought of saying, well, we need to have a kind of African sound with sort of traditionally, geographically situated music?
No, that was never, I mean, we both kind of agreed up front that would not be the right way to go.
So what about the degree of emotion you either wanted to invoke or wanted to stay away from? There's a kind of neutrality, I think, to a lot of the music.
Yeah, well, I think the rule with this film was that a little bit would go a long way. If I like really tried to push for tears, which is like something we did on Beasts of the Southern Wild all the time, we were just like, let's like drive this home, let's like go for tears. And in this film, it felt more, if we did that stuff, it just felt so over dramatic. And I think a lot of that has to do with because Beasts of the Southern Wild felt so fantastic, and this movie is so real feeling. And just a little bit of a push, I think, goes a long way in this film.
And also, it seems so honest, and in terms of the visuals and how the kids are reacting, and almost sort of a documentary kind of feel, and the idea perhaps that music would be pushing too much.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people when they saw, well, not when they saw a trailer, but a lot of people when they heard about the film assumed it was a documentary, or saw stills from it. They're like, oh, this is probably a doc, which it definitely is not.
Do you take a point of view, though? Are we sort of hearing Agu's point of view musically? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I scored it from Agu's point of view. I scored it from a place of uncertainty and ambiguity. I mean, and there's a lot, with droning music, there's a lot you could do with that, especially if you're not keying into whether you're in a major or minor key. I mean, there's stuff you can do. There's pieces of music where I'm not sure whether it's major or minor. The scene that just played after the credits, the cue that played just after the credits with the bucket drums, it's kind of debatable whether, I mean, I never give any color notes the entire time. It's like just, for the most part, just roots and fifths and like a fourth maybe here and there. You know, there's nothing where I'm like, oh, this is major, this is minor. But some of the harmonics rising up from some of those fundamental tones suggests major, because that's what the harmonic series does. It's, you know, suggests major ultimately. So those pieces sound kind of major, but then I start introducing instruments that kind of will have like other notes that will kind of start suggesting minor keys. And I think that's really important for Agu's journey. That was really important because, I mean, he doesn't know he doesn't know necessarily what the right thing to do is. You know, the first thing that happens when he gets captured is they ask him, like, do you want to get revenge on these people who killed your family? He says yes.
Talk to us about what we're actually hearing. What instruments did you use, and how did you apply them?
Well, more than half of the score probably are samples made with this program, Iris 2, where me and my collaborator, Saul Simon McWilliams, who I think is here, hey, he's in the back over there. Saul and I made all these sounds out of, it was like bowed acoustic guitars, bowed cymbals, an old pump organ from the late 1800s. And later on, I started incorporating submarine sonar. Where at one point, Cary said he wanted something to just sound like a submarine sonar, and I was like, I think I have a sample of that somewhere. So I started using, so the main bell sound in the score is a submarine sonar. And then, yeah, a lot of the bass sounds are viola pitch shifted down 5 octaves. You know, it's interesting when you start pitch shifting things very far away, and then from where they originally are meant to be heard, they still sound like they have an air of reality, but they take on a sound you've never heard before. And wine glasses were a big part of this. All of those mellow pads are wine glasses, and those wine glasses have like a lot of high end in them. You start filtering them a lot, and they start getting this very warm, beautiful tone.
How did you come up with this particular palette? Were you simply trying things that you thought would work?
Yeah, I mean, we just, you know, Saul and I both watched the film, and we're both very emotional about it. And yeah, I mean, before even we decided it was going to, we started making these sounds before we decided it was going to be an orchestral score. Before we decided it wasn't going to be an orchestral score. We knew that those sounds were kind of going to be the backbone of the score ultimately, and that the other stuff was going to be whatever it was. But then at the end of the day, that's the stuff that was really working. But yeah, I think that those timbres just felt appropriate. They all felt sort of like a little bit out of tune and edgy, and they felt like the right thing for the score.
And so we're uncomfortable a lot of the time watching the film and feeling it.
Yeah, I mean, being uncomfortable is definitely one of the big emotions in the film, for sure.
In a movie that deals with war, you sort of expect to hear some percussion. What are we listening to, particularly when there's almost a kind of offbeat march, which we...
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
I wish I could like take my phone out and show everybody what it is, but most of the percussion in the score is... Cary and I were listening to this percussion piece, and it was a violin player just hitting the strings with his bow, and with the wood side of the bow, and we really loved it. And then I had the idea of what if we made an entire drum kit out of stringed instruments that were muted. So the main percussion, almost all the percussion in the film is I think it was a guitar, a violin, and a ukulele, and then we rigged up a kick pedal to a upright bass, and we muted all the strings so they wouldn't have notes. And we layered about like 6 of those drum kits on top of each other and put a ton of distortion on it. So all of the like things are all just tons of string instruments being hit with marimba sticks.
It's fascinating. Why that particular approach? Why did that feel right to you? Why did that work?
There's just like a, I don't know, there's like so much of the score is just about ambiguity, about making sounds that you can't put your finger on, you know, and I thought that sound was indistinguishable, and I thought you couldn't tell what that sound was. And I actually played it for another director I was working with, and I was like, what do you think this is? And he was like, is this someone strumming a guitar really loud? Which I was shocked at, that he was able to pick out that they were actually strings. But like, ultimately, I think with percussion in my life, a lot of the time, I'm just kind of chasing like Tom Waits sounds. You know, I mean, the album Bone Machine has like some of the most amazing percussion I've ever heard in my life, and I feel like, you know, I'm a lot of the time when I'm working on percussion, I'm just trying to find kind of like weird sounds that aren't placeable.
Talk to us a little bit about the end title song. Is that yours, or is that your production? Tell us about that.
The song is called Tuername. It's by Ebo Taylor, who's a very famous songwriter and producer and band leader from Ghana. And that song, Tuername, is actually what the mother's singing in the beginning. When she's singing, I think she's doing dishes, she's singing that song. And then whenever you hear like a distant, reverby female voice, that melody is somehow has something to do with Tuername. So that melody has kind of become like our remembrance song for Agu's mother. And we thought it'd be really nice at the end to have that song just like right up front, full out. And then I reharmonized it. You know, it's in a minor key in Ebo Taylor's version, and whenever it's shown in the film, it's in a minor key. And I reharmonized it to kind of be a major thing, and then used instruments from the score to back it up.
And it gives us a bit of an emotional outlet, and yet links us back to the whole mother love concept.
Yeah, thank you. That was completely Cary's idea. I mean, there was a large amount of time where we were like, what are we going to do for the credits? What are we going to do for the credits? What feels right after that kind of a film? And Cary was always pretty staunch about the idea that we had to have one of the kids singing. And so, yeah, I mean, we made that track like 2 days before the final mix. It was like kind of a last-second thing that Cary didn't seem worried about. And I was like, what are we going to do? And it ended up okay.
Your background is somewhat less traditional than that of many film composers. How do you think these differences have helped you or offered you a kind of a fresh approach?
Well, yeah, I come from, I got my undergrad in pop music arranging and my master's in pop songwriting, and I was producing pop music and playing in rock bands for most of my 20s. And mixing a lot of records and doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And I think that my approach doesn't come from as much of a place of like, what does this instrument actually sound like, but from a place of like, what can I make this instrument sound like? Where it's like so many of my ideas don't work without some kind of weird mixing thing, or some kind of saturation, or some kind of reverb that's like changing how the thing works. So much of my composition style is from processing. And I mean, yeah, I feel like, you know, on Beasts of Southern Wild, for example, there's pizzicato strings all over that score, and they're so aggressive and so loud. And what I'm doing with those is just applying tons of distortion and transient modification and things to just like make it louder than it could actually, or harder played than it could in real life. And so, yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time when I was making pop records trying to make instruments sound nothing like what they actually sounded like in real life. But I always kind of like lean towards real instruments sounding unreal, as opposed to trying to make unreal instruments sound real, like trying to make synthesizers sound like something real.
So what are you on to next? Your resume is kind of diverse. You bounce around from films to popular music, and what are you on to next?
Well, the next big project I have is that Ben Zeilen and I, the director from Beasts of the Wild, we're gonna score a documentary about a fireworks festival that I'm very excited about. But sooner than that, I'm going to go to the woods for 2 weeks in a couple days, and I have a 30-page script of a musical that I have to turn into all lyrics. It's going to be a musical with no talking, just singing.
For film or stage?
For TV.
For TV?
Yeah.
Can you tell us any more about it?
I can't tell you more than that. That's it. But I'm really excited to do it.
But 2 weeks in the woods actually sounds pretty good after this.
I'm so excited.
We should make sure that everybody got did everybody get one of these download tickets? Yay. Okay, if you didn't, check with Lynn afterwards. So we've got time for some questions. Who has some questions out there? Yes?
I really enjoyed the film, beautiful score. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'd love to know more about the incredible rapping, the children and the raps, part English,
Yeah.
part what? Can you talk about that more?
Yeah, those kids are just
Really?
doing that. Those are pop songs that they all know in Ghana.
Wow.
Illuminati, I think, is like a huge, which is the beginning song, with all the clapping in it. Well, I think all the clapping in it. But yeah, Cary was, I wasn't there for this at all, but Cary gave me all the files and we were like sifting through them and trying to figure out like how we would present them the right way. But those kids are just doing that, and Cary was just like, yeah. And also I know that Idris was doing a bunch of rapping with the kids. They're like hanging out. doing all that stuff.
So Cary would just be listening to the kids hanging out, and if there was no agenda, he would just kind of record that. And he said, "Oh, this is what I want for the film." It just
Yeah, he would hear them doing it, and then he'd like get the crew over and be like, someone record them doing that.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, some of those, I think some of those like come from like, some of the files are just like 20 minutes of them kind of like popping in and out of different parts of the song, and then it'll be like a minute and a half where they're just like nailing it, and it's like awesome.
Another question. I'm sure there's somebody out there who's got a question. Are we done? Well, great. Please help me
Here,
thank.
you know what? I
Oh,
want to
yes.
ask him a question about. He writes lyrics to his scores. Ask him about that.
Wait a minute. I didn't know anything about this.
I'm not allowed to actually say what any of the lyrics are of any of these songs. It kind of ruins the score for people when they find out. But like, that's a technique that, just came from writing pop songs and like needing to have melodies be dependent on lyrics. And the melody writing that I come from is pop melody writing. So when I'm writing scores, when I'm writing a melody, I almost always like have some kind of lyrical thing in my head.
Well, you're not telling me that there's a Beasts of No Nation song in your head.
No, there's definitely lyrics to the main theme, but I can't. I'm not allowed.
Yeah,
We found out very quickly a while ago that when we start telling people what the lyrics are, like they can't hear the score without singing those lyrics. It kind of loses some of the effect.
just as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap tonight? Well, then please help me thank Dan Romer.
Thank you.